Yes, I'll give the floor then to Dana. We're happy to have her today with us. Dana is actually a coach. She's specialized in a very particular topic for her coaching. Maybe once I give her the floor, she'll say a couple of words regarding that. The topic is also super interesting. It's about navigating transitions, and it goes through both professional life and personal life. So I imagine you will be able to make certain parallels. And also we will have some discussions. Probably I would be stopping recordings during the discussion so that you're free to share your insights without any concerns. And so thanks for being here. And then Dana has the floor.
Wonderful, thank you. I'll go ahead and I'll share my screen. Welcome. I'm so glad to be here with you. It sounds like there's a lot of commonality among the organizations that you all represent, both around facing climate change and the activism and actions that need to be taken to slow it down and make a livable future for us. So I'm very grateful for the work that you do. And it sounds like within the organizations, you yourself are trying to formalize and create structures and processes where there was maybe a more formal, network before. And so those are significant challenges and periods of change. And so I hope that what I'm going to share today is going to be useful to you. I'll give a little bit of background about me. I've spent most of my career in public education in the United States as an educator, a consultant, a grant maker, a nonprofit board member. And so my background has been largely in education. And then about 5 years ago, I began to also focus on end-of-life issues. And I think as a middle-aged person, my parents passed away, and I started realizing that we don't really do death well in a lot of cultures. And I realize I'm speaking to a global audience. It may be different in your context, but here in the United States, we're pretty death phobic and we don't talk about it. And I started to see in this work I was doing as an international grant maker and this work I was doing in my personal life around end of life and death and dying, there were a lot of parallels around the changes that happen when we're saying goodbye and before something new can come. And so that's what prompted me to start my consultancy, Consulting Betwixt. And I serve, as Anna said, as a transition coach, as a nonprofit guide, and as an end-of-life doula. And so my unique perspective on organizational change is that we're going to make some space for difficult conversations and for grief. And it may feel a little odd to talk about it this way to begin with, but I ask that you ride along with me and give your attention, and hopefully it'll be something that will be useful not only in your organization, but hopefully in your personal life as well. So with that, I want to say you'll be getting handouts, so you don't need to take copious notes. I've given very detailed handouts, so you'll be set there. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and Anna will determine, do I need to address it right this second for clarification, or should I wait until we have a bit more time to talk toward the end? If you need to step away, turn your camera off, take a break, whatever is fine. So please take care of yourself. And with that, I will go ahead and get started. So today I'm going to cover the difference between what is a change and what is a transition, the 3 phases of a transition for you to consider and how to navigate those, and then the role that a transition coach can play in supporting you as you lead an organization or others through a period of transition. And I invite you to have a pen and some paper, or maybe be able to take some notes on your computer, because I'm going to ask that you take some moments to pause throughout this presentation and think about your own personal experience and take some notes about how what I'm saying and what I'm showing is directly relevant to what it is you're experiencing. And that'll help you integrate the learning, but also prompt the questions and discussion that we'll have at the end. I saw this quote 6 months ago. It made me laugh. I myself am understaffed at this time. And I think we're talking a lot about having a hard time finding staff, particularly in the US, but I think there's a challenge globally around finding people to do the work that needs to be done. People are feeling stretched. People are tired. The pandemic has taken a toll. The environmental news that we're hearing daily is taking a toll. The changes in the climate are taking a toll, and we're all feeling a bit understaffed. And so my hope is that helping you all think differently about changes in your organization and how to approach them will help you feel a bit more prepared to face the challenges that are coming. Because it's not all about checklists and to-do lists and organized project plans. It's very much about our emotions and the way we're showing up in our work, especially the important work you're doing. And we need to care for ourselves and one another. So William Bridges, and I'll refer to him several times, a lot of what I'm sharing today is rooted in his models. His model of transitions is, he says, it isn't the changes that do you in, it's the transitions. Changes happen, but transitions are optional, and we don't always choose them because they can be a bit harder to choose at the beginning, but it will hobble our efforts in the long run if we don't. So what is the difference between change and transition? So change is situational. If I decide to move from my home here in North Carolina out to California, that is a change. I'm changing my address. I might be changing my job. It's a situation that I'm in. Whereas a transition is a psychological change. It's a reorientation inside on how you're approaching the change and how you feel about what is changing. And so it's an internal process. So changes happen. You know, if I move, I'm physically in a different place, but a transition, an emotional reorientation and repatterning is something that's kind of optional. I can opt out of it. I can shut down. I can ignore it to my detriment, but it is something that I don't have to allow to happen. And sometimes we don't, as organizations, make space for that to happen. And change, you can sort of think of as a checklist. I'm going to, pack my bags, buy my plane ticket, sell my house, whatever those checklist items are. And with transitions, while there is planning involved, we need more symbolic guides to the transition, and things like rituals or ceremonies can help. And I'll explain what I mean by that. But I just want to note that it's not something you can checklist your way through. It is something that you're going to have to make a different kind of space for. So before some of you fall asleep or rush off to work, I wanted to say what it is I'm going to say. And the two things are that communication is absolutely key, talking about the difficult things that need to be said. If there is downsizing and people need to be let go, if you're having financial troubles, if you need to move from being a loose collection of consultants into a more solid organizational structure, and you know that people are not going to like that, you have to talk about it. And so I'm going to share some ways at each of the stages of a transition that you can communicate specifically, but clearly communicating about the things that you may not want to talk about is the first thing. And the second thing is making room for grief. All change can be perceived as a loss, and loss causes grief. And what employers and leaders often recognize as anger, not being on board with a transition, undermining, grousing and complaining, disconnecting, absenteeism, they're actually symptoms of grief. And if we don't attend to it, we can lose important team members and we can have a failure to have a successful change. So those are my two takeaways. I'm giving you the end at the beginning. So I just wanted to make sure I put a fine point on it so you'll see it as it comes up. So I shared some questions. Anna sent them out ahead of time to ask you to root yourself in your own transitions at your organization. It can be one you're going through right now or one that you have gone through in the last few years. And I want you to think about, what do you feel like you managed well? And did you meet those change goals that you were moving toward? And where did your team fall short? Now, if it's helpful, you can write these down. But I just want you to sit with both what went well and did you meet the goals? And where did you fall short? Because the whole purpose of these kinds of trainings and sessions is to learn something that allows us to change our behavior in the future. So if we typically have an approach that we've used for change, and we learn that maybe there's something that's not going to work with the way we do things, we can anticipate how we might want to do it differently. So here are the 3 phases of transitions, according to William Bridges. He wrote a great book called Managing Transitions, Making the Most of Change. He worked on organizational transition for decades, and he recognized that the key thing that we don't always navigate really well is the fact that we're actually in 3 phases of change, of transition at any point in our change effort. And that includes an ending, a letting go of something that has been, a new beginning that will come, and this, what he called a neutral zone, what I sometimes call Betwixt, which is why I'm called Consulting Betwixt, or the void, this ambiguous zone between the old way and the new way, where things are sort of upended. And he was really smart to present it in this way because you can see there's importance on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. And at the very beginning of a transition, you're moving from being a collection of consultants into an organized team with job descriptions and accountability and all those things. The ending that is happening is the way you used to work together and how you got to structure your day, your time, the expectations of you. All of those things are coming to an end. And that's the most important thing at the beginning of this process. And then you're already going to be dealing with, as that ending is happening, this neutral zone. There's going to be a little bit of ambiguity right from the beginning of this. And there might even be the new beginning starting. At the very beginning of this, you might start to do a new way of business. And then as you move through time, less of the old way is present. Some more of the new way is coming, and you're still moving through this neutral zone. So I'm going to spend most of my time today talking with you about the endings and the neutral zone, because those are the places that we don't deal with as effectively as organizations and as leaders. And frankly, a lot of people in our personal lives, we tend to seek the security of a known quantity, a framework, a new practice, or to go back to the old way of doing things. And so we get tripped up in the neutral zone. So I'm going to spend more time on that. And so if I click through some slides or don't cover them in detail, it's because some of it might be pretty expected. And it's going to be in the notes, and it's available in these other places in the research that I'll share with you. But I really want to sit with the things that I've chosen to focus my work on, which is helping people have difficult conversations at the ends of things, including life. Let's start with the endings. The first thing we have to do as leader, leading a group of folks through an ending that comes with any change we've decided to do, something is going to end, is to identify what's been lost, what is going to be lost, to think ahead about how this is going to impact people, who loses what specifically. Is it autonomy? Is it a title? Is it power? Is it money? Is it access? Is it, the kind of work that they're doing? What is it that they're losing? And think about the psychological aspects of it as well. Is there a perception of a loss of status or shame that's associated with this? So be really clear in thinking through what is it that people are losing in your change, and to recognize that not all those losses are concrete. And then when you've recognized what's been lost or is going to be lost, you start to communicate with people, and you start to really normalize that they are going to not feel really good about some of these things that are being lost, that they might feel a sense of grief or a sense of anger or resentment, and things might come up for them. But you're going to give the information frequently and over again, because when people are grieving a loss, they don't hear as well. They literally physically don't hear as well. Their brains don't process information as well. They go into a defensive mode. And so sometimes I'll hear leaders say, I sent out that memo. We talked about it in the meeting. Why aren't they getting it? And it's because they physiologically may not be able to. And so clear, consistent drumbeat of communication is so critical in these early stages when you're having to say goodbye to the way things were. reinforcing the message over and over again. In advertising, they say you have to hear a message 7 times before you'll remember the product. So the same is true and doubly true in a period of heightened emotional response around an ending or a loss. It's important in this stage too that you define what is ending and what is over and what isn't, to the extent that you're able to do that. Because when things start to sort of drip, 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 change and be announced and be lost, people start to think everything's on the table. If that change could come and the one before it and the one before that, then maybe I could get fired, this could happen. And they start to spin out and start to imagine worst case scenarios. So to the extent that you can ethically and truthfully say what is not going to be lost, what they can hold on to, that can give them something to anchor them through this period of change. If the office is staying the same, or their colleagues are staying the same, or their funder is, whatever it is, share something they can hold on to. And if literally nothing is staying the same, then you have to say that and communicate that and be honest, because you'll lose trust really quickly in this time period if you're not communicating clearly. And it's always good at this point to really touch back to your values as an organization, your commitments, the people that you've committed to, the work that you're doing, and to show how, even though whatever it is that is changing, that continuity is there, that what is most important about your values and the work that you're doing is still there, in whatever way that is, because that can help be a guiding light for what's to come. So when you've identified what's being lost and you're communicating with people about it, it's often important to honor the ending. And it's terrible to imagine, but imagine we've had some examples of this, many examples of this in recent years, where people died and we couldn't have a funeral. We couldn't be at a funeral. We couldn't mourn in the same way that we had wanted to and that we have always done. And what that did to people, how hard it was on folks. And the same is true if you have endings at work, major changes at work, and it's not recognized, and you just sort of move through it and pretend it's not happening. You just don't talk about it. You don't bring it up. And so if there are ways that align with the values of your organization, your culture, your specific employees that feel true and right and appropriate, you can create a ritual or a ceremony. And so this photo over here is of a friend who gave birth to a baby in our neighborhood, gave birth to a baby April of 2020, just as the pandemic was taking off. And she was terrified. Is she going to get COVID? It was going to be in the hospital and all of that. And so the baby comes and is healthy and it's great. But then nobody could really go spend time with her and her baby. And there was a lot of distancing. And so come the holidays that December, she said, could we create something in our neighborhood where we put out luminaries and lights and candles, and then she could push her daughter in her stroller through the neighborhood, and we could all join in and just show that there's light and beauty in the world, right? And to celebrate, but in a way that was distanced and safe. And so this is what I put in my yard against the road, right up against my veggie garden. And I got every candle I could find, every light I could find, because I just wanted to bring so much joy to this experience. And it was a really wonderful moment to honor this infant who had arrived, her safe arrival, what we'd been through together as a community, and to recognize that despite the distance and the challenges that we'd had that year, there was still hope and light. And it was so simple, but it was so powerful. And you can do something similar for your organization. So you expect that grief is going to happen. It will happen. It's not a maybe, it is a definite. Grief is going to happen. You have to accept people's perception of loss, even if you don't think it's a loss. If you're like, I'm taking away this old habit, this old practice, this toxic work environment, you can think that it's a really good opportunity that's coming, and people may still perceive it as a loss. People return to abusive relationships because even though leaving may be good, there's something about the comfort of a known relationship, right? And we can't explain it. It doesn't make sense. and you just have to know that it's going to happen. There will be overreactions. You think changing a title or a job description is a matter of a few words and not going to be a big deal. And your employees might just have this huge reaction, a negative reaction, a resistance to it. And that's going to be more true now than it's ever been, because sometimes we find a safe place to express our grief or our anger or our resentment. And that might be in this place because we couldn't do it with our family at home, or something's happening in our community or the global situation at large. And so sometimes people, it's not just about this situation. It's about previous griefs, other challenges. And so you can just sort of expect that some people are going to overreact. And so you acknowledging as a leader in a space of respect and planfulness that people will feel grief will be a life changer for your change effort, for your transition. And then you have a ritual, something, a ceremony, something that honors what's ending. If it's a big enough ending, now if you're changing computer systems, I don't know what a ritual might be. Like everybody holds the plug when you pull it, unplug it. I don't know what that might be. Think about how it affects people. So you have to, attenuate this to the right level, depending on the change you're going through. But if it's a big enough change, consider a ritual or a ceremony or a celebration or a memorial. Give people an opportunity to respect and honor what has passed. If you're so quick to move to the new way of doing things and you're talking it up, you might inadvertently be dismissing or denigrating what's been. And the people who gave their time and lifeblood to this work are saying, was that not important? Am I being dismissed along with my work? Are you saying we were wrong? So just be mindful that in looking to the future, you might be inadvertently dismissing the past, and that could be harmful. If there are ways for people to take a piece of the old way with them, sometimes, there was a story I heard once about people used to work at a place that had a beautiful rose garden on campus, and then the building was sold and the business was moving somewhere else, and people were going to miss going at lunch and sitting in that rose garden, and they were going out and clipping a rose to take with them as a memorial item. And so they decided to have a ceremony in that rose garden so everyone could take clippings. And if it's possible, when it's possible, think about ways that you can compensate for losses, so that if people have to move, they get a pay raise or something that compensates, so that it doesn't all feel like a loss, so that there are some benefits that you can help alleviate some of that. I'm going to pause for a moment and check in and see if there are any questions that anyone has. I'm going to keep going, but check in and let me know. I want to share a concept with you. I'm not going to go into it deeply, but I want to make sure that you're aware of it so that you can dig into it if you think it's going to be useful for your organization. There is a psychological concept called ambiguous loss, and it was a model developed to help us understand losses that are kind of uncertain, unclear. We might not perceive them as a loss in the same way that clearly a job loss or a death is seen as a loss. So it could be someone's a prisoner of war and we don't know if they're alive or not. A loved one has dementia and is slowly over time losing bits of their memory, and each of those little losses compound. Someone's physically present but emotionally absent due to trauma, mental illness, etc., and that's really hard for people to navigate. So those were what it was originally developed to discuss and treat. But what it's really applicable to the time that we're living in now, where there are all these ambiguous losses of safety, sense of normalcy, uncertainty about the future, and our planet's health and our economic systems, and all sorts of things feel really like we're losing something, but we can't always put our finger on it, or it feels amorphous. And so this framework developed by Dr. Pauline Boss is really useful for understanding that those are legitimate feelings of loss and you're going to have grief around them. But also she shared this model for building resilience in the face of ongoing ambiguous loss. And I just think it's especially for those of you in climate change activism and the ongoing losses that we're feeling and recognizing around our environment, but also, with the political efforts, when coal stands in the way, these can help your team and yourself build some resilience in the face of that loss. So she recommends that you start with find meaning and that you don't jump to discover new hope too quickly. But she says the reason there's all these lines in here is because she's saying move back and forth between them as you need. There's no one order. Take what is useful, leave what isn't. So find meaning is around seeing if you're able to find a sense of meaning in this loss or sense of purpose. And sometimes loss is meaningless, and so you don't always have to do that, but it can help if you can if you're caring for a loved one who has dementia and you really find meaning in your role as a caretaker as an expression of your love, that can help carry you through. So that's an example, but find some meaning either individually or collectively. Adjust mastery is saying, just recognize that the things that you've been great at in the past may not serve you in the new way of doing things. And you're going to have to learn something and develop new mastery going forward. So just recognize that you might not be at 100% in this period of change and that you will get there. Normalize a sense of ambivalence. Ambivalence is when we have two different feelings at the same time. We might be excited about the change that's coming and really afraid. We might be angry and happy at the same time. And so we're like, what is going on? I'm so confused in this period of transition. So just normalizing it, saying that's totally normal. It's expected. We're going to support each other through this. And it's not always going to be like this. Reconstructing your identity, recognizing that when you go through a period of change, the way you structured your identity before may not work in the new way. If you have a title, a certain level of influence, a certain kind of work, that may have changed in this new world. And so you need to reconstruct your identity and revise your attachment to what is being lost. And so it doesn't mean you have to forget it or move on and never look back at it, but it's not going to be the same relationship. And then you move on to what gives you new hope in the future. So in this change effort, what's the new beginning? What's coming down the lane? And how can that give you energy and excitement for what's to come and to muddle through this uncertainty in the middle? So I put this here in between endings and as we move into the neutral zone, because both of these times, things coming to a close, things ending, having to say goodbye, and then moving through the period of uncertainty related to the neutral zone, that's when these feelings of ambiguous loss are going to be most heightened. And this model may be useful for you. And I share in my resources at the end a book about this that will be widely available. Oh, okay, so I've talked a bit, and I want you to sit and integrate this for just a moment, thinking about what I've just shared about making space for grief, communicating clearly and directly about loss. And I want you to think back to some endings in your own life, to some times when you had to say goodbye or you lost something or someone that was abrupt or took you by surprise. And what is your style of bringing things to a close? Some people become control freaks. Some people shut down or disengage or pull away. Some people become very emotional. Some people become very staid and emotionless on the outside. So just jot down for a moment how you navigate transitions, bringing things to a close, and what ways that we've just discussed, what ways do you potentially self-sabotage a transition or a change as a result of that? So take a moment and write those things down. Goodbye. We may still be saying goodbye. We may still be in that period of losing something, but we've moved more to where our focus and attention is on what is called the neutral zone. The old processes and procedures are ending. We may not have everything figured out about the way it's going to be. And so we're in this messy, muddy middle. And it's a space of ambiguity, and we cannot expect that people are going to do their best work in this place. This neutral zone is where some of those grief symptoms that we talked about earlier, if you've attended to the grief and you've normalized it, Hopefully there are fewer of them in this space. They will really rear their head if you haven't. And this is the place where there might be more absenteeism. People are less engaged in conversations, in meetings. People just aren't really bringing their A game. And that's often in response to this uncertainty. Ambiguity does not feel good for most people. And so this is where people seek comfort, and they want to go back to the old way because they knew that and it feels better that way. Or they want to move forward and just get this over with and start the new thing. And you'll have people that do both in the, that want either one of those things in your organization. And some people who will just enjoy, maybe more than is good for your organization, the ambiguity and the lack of demand for production. So some people can become really low producing at this point. And recognizing that when there's bigger efforts outside of your organization, as we've been experiencing for the last few years, this is going to be doubly true. But it is also, there is hope. It is also a wonderful period where you can be creative. And so you've moved away from these established frameworks and ways of doing things. And it can be a time to really think of how you want to reorganize yourself as an organization, what you want to promote as your values. Do the old ones still work? What was it about the procedures that you used to do and that always got in the way? And you're like, why do we do it like this? Is there a better way? So this is a time to step back, take stock, slow down. Don't decide to, have a conference in the middle of this transition. Don't decide now's the time to put out that 75-page research document. Like, this is a time to really make space for reflection and to bring together all the different people in your organization to the extent that that is possible, or representatives of all different sectors in your organization, so that you are hearing from everyone. How is this affecting you? What are your ideas about what used to work? What should we keep? What should we carry through? What is it we need to let go of? What are your hopes for how we can do this in the future? And that can help people build their skills around innovative thinking and collaborative model development, but it can also help them have a stake and an ownership in the new way. If you allow them to sit on the sideline and have the change happen to them, they can critique it and not take any blame for it. They don't have insight into the challenges that you're facing. But if you bring them into the conversation, it's harder for them to say, I don't know what's going on. Well, you're in the conversation, or I didn't decide that, but you were at the table when we made the decision. So to the extent you can include more people, it makes a more robust response, but it also prevents that naysaying and builds that buy-in in the future. And it's important in this time. It's not the Wild West, for an American reference. It's a time you can create some temporary frameworks and models and procedures and expectations just for the time being. You can try out some things, and if they work, you can keep them for the new way of being. It's like when you're driving on a road and they're fixing the road, so you get that sort of bumpy little side road to go around it. It's not a permanent solution. It's not, completely smooth, but it gets you safely to the other side. So think about, what are these temporary frameworks you need to get you through? And I'm going to sound like a broken record, but obviously communication is important here, right? So again, we're re-communicating why the old way needed to come to an end, normalizing that ambiguity here in the center, saying we don't have it all figured out. I understand that that's frustrating. Here's the timeline for where we're going. Here's how we're going to get there. But right now, what we're doing is reorienting ourselves as individuals and as a team. And we're going to expect that it's going to feel messy and uncertain. And I know that doesn't feel great, but here's how we're going to help one another through. And anticipating what's coming and helping people visualize that can give them something to hold on to. And this, like I said, with the transition monitoring team or camaraderie, you can really build cross-organizational collaboration in a way that maybe didn't happen in the day-to-day work you had before. If you have different offices or different work streams or different teams, starting to mingle those folks and get them connected to one another can really build a sense of camaraderie. We're in this together. They're listening to all of our voices, and that can really be helpful. A transition monitoring team, which I share in materials, is not in charge of managing the transition, and they're not in charge of making decisions, but they serve as a communication hub so that those in the leadership can pass things through them and say, does this sound right? How's this going to land? Are people going to be receptive to this? They can share what folks are worried about, what rumors are spreading, so that the leadership can quash the misinformation. And it just is another way for people to be really invested in understanding the challenges that you're facing and being a part of deciding on, guiding what that solution will be. So that's very little for the neutral zone. I didn't spend as much time there. Normalizing the ambiguity, having good communication, and bringing lots of different folks together to be a part of that process are some key components. There's more in the materials that I'll share. But I'd like you to take a moment now and do another self-reflection and be honest with yourself about how in your life, when you experience a place of uncertainty or ambiguity, when you don't really know what's happening, the rules of the road aren't the same, what feelings come up for you? And how do you act? What actions do you take when you're in that place of ambiguity? Let's go ahead and take a moment and jot a couple of things down. Way of a successful transition. So that's why I'm prompting you to begin to consider these. So then we get to the new beginnings. And these are, this is a time of big energy. It can be a time of excitement. It can be a time of renewed dedication and interest to the organization, to what you're fighting for. And so I'm just going to share a couple of hallmarks of this time period, just to help you if you're in this place right now and you've kind of come through the endings and the neutral zone and you're more here. Here are some things to consider. The first is the marathon effect, which you may have heard of this with other change management efforts, but if you've ever seen a marathon be run, sometimes there are thousands of people in line. And the start happens, the starting gun shoots off, and the people that are out front, who are the really competitive runners, to just take off. There's nothing in their way. They know where they're going. They're out to compete, to win. And so they just take off. And then the people who are sort of, pretty good runners and really feeling confident about their ability to complete this race, they're seeing that the people are out ahead and they're starting to stretch and they're getting ready to run, and they'll get across the start line in the not too distant future. And then you have the folks on the way back who have never done a marathon before, not sure they're going to finish it. They haven't even started stretching. It might be an hour before they even get to the start line. And by the time they get there, the headliners, the people at the front, are going to be halfway done. And so the same is true of change in an organization. If you're in the leadership team or you are leading the organization, you may have been thinking about and preparing for and reorienting yourself to this change for 6 months, 9 months, a year. And your direct reports, those who are managing the next level down, you may have let them in on the change 3 months ago or 6 months ago. And then the people who are in the back, the people who are your, vast majority of your employees, if you're a large organization, they may just be getting clued in on the change. And they psychologically aren't in the same place. They physically aren't in the same place. They're emotionally. So it's really important that even though the change has started, the marathon started at the same time, where people are in that queue matters for how they're going to experience this. And that's why I put this photo here of a sunrise. It's a beautiful sunrise in the distance. There's an ocean, there's a gorgeous beach, and there's dew here on the handrail. And it's, if I'm just finding out about this change, I'm not thinking about the beautiful sunset or, how it's reflecting on the ocean. I'm worried about this dampness right here on this handrail. So it's all about perspective and keeping that in mind and holding that empathy for your staff. It's important to recognize that if people feel energetic and excited and want to take off and do something, that you find ways to harness that new energy and not squash it. This is a time when old fears may resurface because, again, it's another period of change, moving out of that period of the neutral zone into the beginning. It might trigger some of those old fears to resurface. you need to find ways of gelling, re-gelling. It's the caterpillar to butterfly with the chrysalis in the middle where it's nothing but goo. This is a very common way of describing these periods of transformation. So who are you now? You're not a caterpillar anymore. You're coming out of the goo stage. What does your butterfly look like? And find ways to celebrate successes, mini successes, early successes, so that people feel like, okay, we're going to get this. It's possible. I'm feeling I can do this. Remember, I said that adjusting your sense of mastery. You may not be good at the new way of doing things right out of the gate. And it's going to take some time. So when people do it right, when you hit a milestone, celebrate them and communicate. So William Bridges shares a really great, it's called the 4 Ps. He's like, you have to communicate the 4 Ps at any beginning of a new beginning. The purpose, why you're doing what you're doing, the purpose of the new practices. Give the logic behind it, because people will be like, I don't know why we're doing it this way. And if they can't see the logic behind it, they might not be invested in it. If they can't see why it matters, give them the big picture of how the new way is going to look and feel. Really, build it up for them so that they can see a vision for where you're going. Give them a plan. Show them the step-by-steps. Here's how we're going to get you the training you need. Here's how we're going to make the connections that we need. Here's how we're going to build those skills. Here's, just be clear about your plan, because then people can handle ambiguity and periods of uncertainty and new beginnings a lot easier if they feel like they're being held within a container of competence. They're like, somebody is in charge. Somebody is managing this. They're anticipating this. They knew we were going to experience grief. They gave us flexibility in that period of the neutral zone. They know what's happening, and they're going to get us there. So share that plan, include them in the design of that plan to the extent that you can, and help them see the part that you need them to play in this new beginning and what their ultimate role is going to be. In this period of uncertainty, people start to feel irrelevant, uncertain, sidelined, worried. And so to the extent that you can say, here's why we need you, here's the role you're going to play in our new configuration, in our new way of working. Here's what we're going to rely on you for. People need a sense of purpose. They need that. So tell them what part they're going to play. And again, clear, consistent drumbeat of messaging with aligned policies and procedures. And as a leader, you need to embody this messaging. So if you're asking everyone to cut down on purchases of paper clips or something, then if you purchase a $70,000 new company car, that's going to be sending a different message, right? So make sure that your actions are aligning with this new message, this new value system, this new way of doing things, so that everyone sees that you're in on it with them. Okay, so I want to spend a moment on thinking about, so we've reflected on how you navigate endings, what comes up for you in these periods of ambiguity in the neutral zone. And I've just shared some things that you can do to launch a new beginning effectively. So I'd like you to think about 1 to 3 things that you've done in any of these places. And you might be building on something you've already jotted down. But what are some things that you might have done that could have gotten in the way of a successful transition in the past? And then once you have those down, reframe them and think about what you know now, and to align more fully with what's helpful, what you know now, how might you do it differently this time? So for example, if you're going through a period of change as an organization and you're going to have to lay off 10 people, and you wait until the last minute because you know it's going to be terrible news, and then you shared it and you just ripped the Band-Aid off and people were fired and everybody just moved on. Well, now we know that waiting out of a sense of worry or freaking people out might actually cause harm. So maybe there's a more thoughtful, planful way to announce that, to support people through that transition, get them some job training, help connect them with new jobs if that's possible. So just spend a moment and reflect for a second about how you might do things differently It's easier to think now than it is in the moment. I wondered, so I was going to have a breakout group. If we had more than, the number of people that are here. Sometimes if you get like 10 folks, it gets a little hairy, but I think we could do a share out. I wonder if anybody's willing to share a reflection of something that you've realized either in this presentation or since your change, you've reflected and figured that out. Something that you think might be helpful for us to share with one another. And I know that Anna she can cut that out of this recording. It won't be shared with others. So there is a sense of, okay, so with the breakout group, we had this discussion around, sharing your own insights about areas you might trip up in your own leadership of transitions. And we got to hear from one another. And so hearing other people's stories about how they're navigating, what their challenges are, and some ideas they might have can help us enrich our own practice. So that's why we spent some time on that. I want to go ahead. So we want to go ahead and talk about what's the role a transition coach, someone like me, could play in this process with you. And so why might you consider coaching? Some people have had executive coaching or transition coaching or personal coaching, but why might this be something you would seek? And a coach, a transition coach, can help you do what we did today, which is to help you learn new information potentially around nonprofit leadership or your specific field or employee management. You want to find coaches that have the skill sets and experience that you're looking for. They can help you explore what you're good at. Think about ways that you do things well, what you can be proud of. Identify honestly the ways that you might undermine even your own stated goals. Sometimes we do things that get in our own way, and a coach can help you do that in a space that feels safe. Because as leaders who are leading efforts, your job is to look like you're in charge and in control and decisive, and you're leading others, and they need to trust you. And so you don't always have a place, a colleague, someone you can trust and be honest with about what you're struggling with. So that's what a coach can offer you. A coach can interview colleagues, board members, others, to get a more 360 view of your leadership style and your strengths and areas for development to inform that process. They can challenge your assumptions. Sometimes we have stories in our head that we tell ourselves like, oh, that thing always happens because XYZ. This is always difficult because of this. And a coach can actually say, well, tell me more about that. Is that true? And to unpack some of those assumptions, those short circuits we do with stories that can keep us in a rut. They can ask tough questions, help you recognize insights that you've made and wins that you've made, because sometimes leaders are the hardest on themselves. They don't stop and say, gosh, I did this really well. I'm excited about that. They just rush on to the next problem, the next fire to put out, because there's always another fire to put out. And I think most of all, a coach can help you sit still. You all are successful because you move and you push and you change and you take on too much. And that's what makes you a successful nonprofit leader or a successful activist, an organizer. But that's not always where learning happens. That's not always where development or transformation happens. In that neutral zone, there is stillness. There is a space where you allow creative flow to happen when you're used to managing by a checklist. So a coach can give you that space as well. Coaches should, just to give you some guidelines, if you haven't looked for a coach before, they should be able to share their framework or model like I did today. I work with William Bridges' model because it aligns very much with the model around death, dying, and bereavement that I use, and also around my personal practices with an earth-based spirituality, the cycles of the seasons, death, rest, and rebirth. And so it resonates really strongly with me, and people who resonate with that model would work well with me. A coach honors confidentiality and holds your confidences. They help you feel okay with feeling vulnerable. They help you explore the psychological aspects of transitions. They're not only thinking about logistics. So many other people in your lives are going to be thinking about logistics, and this gives you a place. They're not therapists, but they can help you explore your feelings and beliefs around the work that you're doing. And they often have the relevant experience in the field so you can trust their expertise. Coaches should not tell you what to do. They should not shame you for decisions that you've made, and they should not spend most of the time talking. So I did spend all my time talking today, but that's not my normal mode. And coaches can't make the changes for you, fix your situation, or assure you of success. Anyone who tells you that they can make you successful is lying to you. So you are in charge of your coaching relationship. So shop around. Just because they worked for a colleague doesn't mean they're going to be a good fit for you. Ask questions, probe, and really listen to your gut. Like, how do you feel with this person? Do you feel comfortable or on edge? Do you just not like the way their voice sounds? That might be a big problem if you're only going to engage over the phone or on video calls. Choose a coach who models the behavior they're asking you to model, that they are in alignment with their way of encouraging you to behave. And choose a coach who has a clear contract with what their obligations are to you, what your obligations are to them, and how to end the engagement if it's not working. And I ask that you just remember that with coaching, you're in charge, and coaches will suggest, make guidance, give guidance, do invitations. You choose what to take in. You choose what to listen to. You choose what to practice. If you only show up once a month or once every other week and you talk for a little bit and then you never reflect on it again, it's not going to help integrate any changes in your behavior or practice or mindset. It requires, just like a meditation practice or an exercise routine, that you return to it over and over again, that you reflect and share those reflections and insights with your coach, and then move on to the next step and the next step and the next step. And they'll be your partner, your guide in the process. So I just wanted to share that to kind of say these transitions that you are navigating are huge, and they are, they can feel overwhelming. And having someone in your corner and having someone to brainstorm with, to grouse with, to have a place to be honest with, to be vulnerable in the way that you've shared some vulnerabilities here today, can be really helpful in supporting you and helping you stay engaged during a period of significance. So we're not going to do that breakout because we don't have time. So I'm just going to show, I'm going to say this, I'm going to leave you with this. John O'Donohue is an Irish poet and philosopher who's amazing. He left us too early, about 10 years ago. But he talked about the Celtic mindset of moving through thresholds and the betwixt and the between. And he says no threshold need be a threat, but rather an invitation or a promise. So I hope that what I've shared with you today can give you an opportunity to see your next challenge, to approach the change that you're in now as an opportunity and a promise, and not a threat that you need to defend yourself against or push through. Now we have a few minutes for questions. You'll get these resources. We'll have a few minutes for questions if you would like. It has been my great pleasure to spend my evening with you, maybe your morning or afternoon. And please do reach out. You'll have my contact information if I can be helpful. And I wish you good luck. I hope you make space for your heart in this work. It's not all your head. And thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dana. It was indeed a really insightful session. I would say even therapeutical. Even how you lead it, it's really perfect. Thanks a lot. Yes, I hope Dana would have some space to continue discussions with you on one-to-one, and I'm happy to connect you with Dana. And eventually, I will also follow up as usual while sharing resources, which Dana also has kindly prepared. And just a big thank you once again to Dana. It was really perfect. A lot of like food for reflection, which I'm sure we all will be doing. And thanks as well for the participants for joining and sharing your reflections and insights with us. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Wish you good luck.
Have a good one. Bye.
Thank
You
you
too.
very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.